What's the latest on the Israel-Hamas war? The hostage negotiations remain stalled as the U.S. debates if it is going to try to present a new deal or not to the sides in the coming days. Fighting has intensified throughout most regions of the Gaza Strip, in parallel to the polio vaccination campaign that is still continuing. Intensifying fighting in the West Bank and between the IDF and Hezbollah as well. I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive deep into the latest on the Israel-Hamas war. On day 340 to the war, the major news relates to the hostage situation, intensifying fighting in the Gaza Strip, the humanitarian situation in Gaza, and the escalations between the IDF and Hezbollah. On the hostage negotiation front, there were many reports throughout the past days that the United States is working on trying to draft a final proposal using the phrase a take-it-or-leave-it moment in the deal. Many rumors surfaced about this proposal, including the United States may be considering trying to make a deal with Hamas directly in order to bypass Israel and negotiate for the U.S. citizens that are held in captivity, as well as other rumors about what the deal may include. Right now, the proposal appears to be completely stalled, however, as both sides have stated that their current terms are non-negotiable. Hamas is adhering to its agreement to a July 2nd proposal, which includes a complete IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and the possibility of an ongoing truce beyond the first phase, leading to a complete ceasefire and an end to the current round in the war, while Israel is adhering to its demand that the IDF will maintain its presence along the Philadelphia axis, the border between Gaza and Egypt, have either checkpoints or monitoring capabilities along the Netzarim corridor to monitor which Palestinians travel north to the Gaza Strip, and that the fighting will be able to resume after the first phase of the deal, i.e. after the first 6 weeks. According to a report in Israel's Channel 13, over the past week, Israeli and U.S. delegates have probed the possibility of holding another high-profile summit meeting in Cairo. However, this was reportedly outright rejected by Egypt, with the country citing extreme anger within the Egyptian government over Israel's insistence on maintaining its presence along the Philadelphia axis, and over statements that were made by the Israeli Prime Minister about Egypt's failure to secure the border. It's also important to note that in different news reports in Egypt, it is constantly being reminded that according to the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, there is a limit to how many forces can be maintained along the border between the countries. Egypt is saying that if Israel maintains its forces along the Philadelphia axis, that it is going to be in violation of the peace treaty. It is noteworthy that the matter is actually a bit more complex, since when the peace treaty was signed between Israel and Egypt, Israel still maintained its active occupation in the Gaza Strip, so the IDF forces were along the Philadelphia axis. In 2005, however, when Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip, new deals were added, new provisions relating to this border. However, what is important is that in Egypt it is being cited that if the IDF continues its presence along the Philadelphia axis, at some point this will be seen as a violation of the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. With regards to the possibility of a deal emerging, the United States has denied any direct dealing with Hamas, and it is also very unlikely that such a deal could even take place, even if there would be such an attempt at negotiation directly between the United States and Hamas. Meanwhile, sources in the U.S. have been quoted in the last several days saying that the country is debating whether it even wants to present the current deal, the current last take-it-or-leave-it deal, since it is expected to be outright rejected by both sides, and this will lead to a collapse in the negotiations. Right now, negotiations are technically still ongoing, however they are completely stalemated. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, the fighting in the Strip has intensified on several different fronts in the past days. In the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, several days ago, the IDF carried out a major airstrike in Gaza City near the El Ahli hospital. The targets of the airstrike were reportedly Ahmed Fawzi Muhammad Wadia, a top-ranking Nukba platoon commander of Hamas's Darj Tufah region. Among others, Wadia was also in charge of the Al-Qassam attack forces in Netiva Sarah, that is an Israeli kibbutz, along the borders of Gaza. Wadia was in charge of the attack on October 7th. The IDF reported that in addition to Wadia, 8 Hamas operatives were also killed in that attack. Palestinian sources did not put out any statement about that attack specifically. However, there was a report that was disseminated on the day of that attack saying that 9 Palestinians were killed in an airstrike in Gaza City, so possibly that is that airstrike, and it may be that it is 1 civilian plus the other 8 Hamas operatives. That is speculation on my part. The Palestinian sources did not put out any statements about that particular attack. In addition, there were major airstrikes that were also reported throughout the last several days in Jabalia refugee camp, and both the IDF and the Al-Qassam brigades reported intensive ground fighting in the Zaytun area, all in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. On September 8th and 9th, the IDF also issued evacuation orders to Palestinians, calling upon civilians in the northwestern parts of Gaza City, specifically in the areas in and around the Rimal neighborhood, to evacuate towards the humanitarian zones in Deir al-Balah, indicating that there's going to be intensified fighting in that region as well in the coming days. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, in addition to the ongoing fighting around the Netzarim corridor, major airstrikes were reported in the last several days in the al-Bureid refugee camp as well as the al-Nuseirat refugee camp. I remind everyone that the IDF had issued evacuation orders to Palestinians in certain areas of the al-Bureid refugee camp as well as the outskirts of Deir al-Balah already 2 weeks ago, indicating that the IDF is planning some sort of operation in that area. Right now that may be stalled due to the vaccination campaign of polio vaccines that is going on in the Gaza Strip. It is also possible the IDF is just waiting for an opportune moment. Remains to be seen. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, on September 9th, a massive airstrike was reported in the al-Mawasi refugee camp humanitarian zone. This is a strip of beach that runs from Rafah to Han Yunis, where the vast majority of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have evacuated to since the war began. It is a defined humanitarian zone of the Gaza Strip. The IDF reported that the target of that airstrike included, among others, Samer Ismail Abu Daka, who is the person in charge of Hamas's air units, Usama Tabash, who is in charge of Hamas's lookout post, and Ayman Mavhouh, who is a prominent Hamas figure. Al Jazeera initially put out a report stating that all three figures were killed in the attack. However, there's been no confirmation of that report in Al Jazeera anywhere else, not in Palestinian sources, nor in any messages from the IDF, so remains to be seen if that statement that the three were killed is in fact valid or not. The Hamas-affiliated Shihab news site, as well as civil defense units in Gaza, also part of Hamas, initially reported that 40 Palestinians were killed in those attacks and that 60 were wounded. However, the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip, which is known to be a far more reliable source, stated that in total 19 Palestinians were killed in that attack and over 65 were injured. In addition to that, on September 10th, Mahmoud Hamdan, who is the commander of Hamas's Tel Sultan battalions, was assassinated by the IDF. The IDF reported that in that airstrike that was targeted by the Air Force in cooperation with the Shabak and intelligence units, 3 other platoon commanders within the Tel Sultan battalion were also assassinated. This is likely to prove to be a major blow for the Al-Qassam brigades. The Tel Sultan battalion in the Rafah region has been the one that has managed to hold out against the IDF almost the longest since the war began. In the last several weeks, the IDF has started to say that the battalions in the Rafah area are starting to dismantle. This is likely to be one of the blows that maybe will let the IDF withdraw some of its forces from that area and move on to a different region. Remains to be seen how that develops in the coming days. Regarding casualties in the Gaza Strip, the IDF is reporting that since the invasion of Gaza began at the end of October, 340 IDF soldiers have been killed in the Gaza Strip and 2,271 have been injured. In turn, the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting since the war began in the Gaza Strip, 41,020 Palestinians have been killed and 94,925 have been injured. I remind everyone that the Palestinian Health Ministry does not distinguish between civilians and militants in the Gaza Strip. The latest report that the IDF put out regarding how many militants it estimates have been killed in the Gaza Strip put that number at roughly 17,000. On the humanitarian front in the Gaza Strip, an important development may be brewing after on September 3rd it was published that the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has instructed the IDF to begin preparations for taking over distribution of humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip. This would mean that the IDF troops would be taking responsibility for the humanitarian distribution rather than the United Nations or the affiliated NGOs like the World Central Kitchen. While such a move has been criticized by different elements within the IDF as well as by Israel's defense minister, the Israeli government stated that it is essential in order to stop aid from reaching Hamas, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu was quoted as stating that this would be a temporary move in order to stop Hamas from rebuilding itself in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Now, I bring this up because it may seem like a small logistical change. However, this would actually have substantial repercussions if it actually does come to the fold. First, this would mean that the IDF is assuming some governmental or administrative role in the Gaza Strip, which is a step closer towards direct military rule, somewhat similar to what there is in the West Bank. Even more importantly, however, this will likely result in the humanitarian distribution becoming more of a battleground area than it is even today in the Gaza Strip, as IDF troops are going to be positioned in stationary places in Gaza, specifically where humanitarian aid is being distributed, which is likely to lead them being attacked by Hamas units, which is going to lead to further breakdown of the distribution of humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip. At this point, it is still in the planning phase. However, again, I bring it up since this may end up being quite a critical turning point in the war. If this does happen, the IDF have not put out any information about when this plan would be taking place. In other news related to the humanitarian situation, the polio vaccine campaign throughout the Gaza Strip is still underway. While some reports have indicated that in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip it is proceeding slower compared to other areas, it is nonetheless still ongoing beyond the initial 5 days that were decided upon. I remind everyone this is a major campaign in cooperation between the IDF, the different health administration forces within the Gaza Strip, as well as with the United Nations, in order to try to vaccinate all the children within the Gaza Strip in different humanitarian zones where specific ceasefires are being declared every day. Alongside this, two other fronts that are continuing to see escalations in the last several days are the West Bank and the northern parts of Israel and the southern parts of Lebanon. In the West Bank, the IDF has re-entered the city of Tulkarem several days after it concluded a major operation in the area that included massive arrests and airstrikes. Intensive gun battles were reported in the last 24 hours in the areas of Tulkarem, and Palestinian sources also reported that the IDF was besieging a hospital in the area. There was also a report, not a lot of details were published about it in the last several days, saying that the Israeli police force and Shabak have arrested several Palestinians who were planning a major terror attack within Israel. According to the report, one of them was arrested within Israel on Road 6, and 13 others were arrested in different areas in Israel. Not a lot of information was given about what they were planning and what stage of the attack they were in. However, it was reported at least some of those arrested were from the Bani Naim region in the West Bank. Meanwhile, the daily escalations between the IDF and Hezbollah continue. It was estimated they might have died down after last week there was the quote-unquote retaliation of Hezbollah that was to some extent circumvented by Israel. However, they are continuing at pretty much the rate that they have been in the last month. The events are far too much to recount. However, on each day there are upwards of 40 to 50 rockets, missiles, and drones that have been fired by Hezbollah towards northern Israel, and repeated IDF airstrikes throughout southern Lebanon and further north in Lebanon as well. Among others, in the last several days, rockets hit buildings in northern Israel in the areas of Nahariya, and drones also detonated above the Amiad junction. This is a little further south in Israel than Hezbollah tends to attack. In addition, the IDF reportedly assassinated Muhammad Qasem Ashair, who's a prominent Redwan force commander in Hezbollah. This happened in the Karun region, and there were also lots of different IDF airstrikes that were carried out throughout the different areas in Lebanon. Somewhat indicative of this ongoing escalation, on September 10th, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant stated that, quote, "We are moving towards completing the mission in the south and shifting the weight of the war north." His statements later came under heavy criticism from other elements within the Israeli government, stating that the mission in Gaza is not yet complete. However, the very indication that the Defense Minister is saying the weight is starting to shift north is somewhat indicative of, on the one hand, the Hamas battalion starting to possibly dismantle or start with the IDF starting to see results of that dismantling in the Gaza Strip. At the same time, the brewing escalations in the north that at some point are going to come to the fold in one way or another. Those are my highlights from the last several days. As I said, the main highlights focus on the fact that the negotiations are completely stalled and the U.S. is trying to decide if it is going to propose another final deal or not. Escalations throughout the Gaza Strip from the north to the south, developments on the humanitarian front, ongoing fighting in the West Bank, and possibly intensifying fighting between Israel and Hezbollah in northern Israel and southern Lebanon. If you find these reports informative, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications. Please remember to send them to anyone who you think might be interested in the war. I am Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and an Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.